Hello, how are you doing? I'm Rob Hallam and welcome to Car File. Now on this week's programme we're going to be focusing, if you pardon the pun, on some of the latest cars in the Ford lineup. We're going to start off with the beloved Ford Fiesta, a car that at some point in time we've all either driven or owned one. And from there we're going on to the Puma, a car that's based on the Fiesta but a lot more sporty, and of course it brought us those fantastic Steve McQueen adverts. And then in the second part of the programme we'll be looking at the Focus, a vehicle that before it left the design board had its work cut out because it was replacing the all-conquering Ford Escort. And then last but not least, I'll be getting behind the wheel of one of these, the big Ford Explorer.
Faced with fierce competition from its small car rivals, Ford have decided it's time to freshen up the Fiesta and give it, well, a slightly new look for the Millennium, but without taking away the basic characteristics of the car. Now, with the new kids on the block, the likes of the Toyota Yaris, the Fiat Punto, which is already outselling the Fiesta in parts of Europe, and the Renault Clio, Ford have given the Fiesta its house style. Yes, it gets new edge design styling. If you're mystified as to why the new Fiesta didn't get the 1.7 engine instead of the 1.6 engine, well, it's because Ford didn't want the Fiesta treading on the toes of the Puma. You see, the 1.4 Puma has 88 brake horsepower, the 1.7 125, and this new S engine kind of fits nicely in the middle with 103 brake horsepower. It does 0 to 60 in just over 10 seconds and a top speed of 113 miles an hour. Revisions inside the Fiesta are quite frankly very minor. In fact, looking at this now, you can see very little difference from the outgoing model. But it does look a bit better, and it's very well put together and very well built with a look of the Puma inside, but just doesn't have the je ne sais quoi and the style of the Renault Clio interior. There's also the option of head and chest side airbags, which is apparently a first for a car of this size. One thing it doesn't have, which is very annoying, is a switch inside the car to open the boot. You always have to use the key, and that really gets on your nerves. At the front end of the car, well, as you can see, it's been given Ford's new edge design headlights. It gets a new bonnet, new wings and new bumpers. It's almost like the Fiesta's gone into a hairdresser's and asked for a new edge design perm, and it's gone slightly wrong. And at the back, well, again, very little has changed. It gets this cheap fuel flap, which looks like it's going to fall off, an extra spoiler, and it seems to have grown some bulby bits, which look like a pair of breasts at some angles. I thought new edge design was all about sharp, angly points. That certainly isn't. The new Fiesta lineup now consists of the 1.25 and 1.4 Zetec engines, plus the base 1.3 Endura E and 1.8 litre diesel. You can choose from 5 trim levels: Encore, Finesse, Zetec, LX and Gear, plus the new S. Amazingly, prices have slightly increased, with the base 1.3 Encore at £7,750, rising to the 1.4 Gear at £11,850. Now, if you're in the market for a small car, well, there are lots to choose from. They're all very different, but all very competent. So have Ford hit the right note with the new Fiesta? Well, it's more a revamp than anything else in response to the likes of the new Clio and the new Fiat Punto. The Fiesta has always been a very entertaining car to drive, and still is. It's probably the best of the bunch for that, despite having any real potent engines in the range apart from the new 1.6 Zetec S. I think you'll either love or hate the new Fiesta. I personally like it. Or you'll take so long to make up your mind over whether you like the car that you'll buy something completely different.
If you've ever seen Steve McQueen in Bullitt, I'm sure you'll agree it's one of the best car chases ever. Real American muscle cars and the original King of Cool, an unbeatable combination, and one that's helped Ford sell lots and lots of cars. You see, computer wizardry brought the long-dead McQueen back from the grave and put him behind the wheel of the Puma for Ford's TV ads. It was a move that made the Puma the UK's best-selling coupe and the only Ford with a waiting list. All very clever marketing. But would the macho Frank Bullitt really have traded in his power-packed Mustang for something that produces just 123 brake horsepower? Somehow I doubt it. But I reckon he could well have been tempted by this, Ford's pumped-up version, the Racing Puma. Ford's motorsport team sent the Puma down the gym to build up some extra muscles, and the result is a limited edition of 1,000 Pumas bearing the racing badge that are now lower, meaner and far sexier than before. And the next step was for Ford's long-standing partner Tickford to get their hands on the little cat. They stripped and rebuilt the twin-cam four-cylinder engine to boost the power up to 153 brake horsepower. Top speed was now up to 126 miles an hour, 0 to 60 down to just under 8 seconds. And the price tag, well, that was up as well, I'm afraid, £23,000. And when you consider that the 1.7 version of the Puma is £15,000, that works out at about £8 extra for the pleasure of shaving a second off your 0 to 60 time and adding 3 miles per hour onto your top speed, which does make them rather expensive seconds. But hang on just a minute, because there's more to this car than a couple of seconds here and there. This is a great car because of its handling. Now, the Puma was always a superb car to drive, but the revisions to the Racing Puma have made it a handling dream. Tuned suspension and revisions to the springs mean that it's got absolutely bags of grip. It goes around this track as if it's on rails, even on a wet, miserable, damp day like this. The steering now has got so much response that it almost chatters away to you as you drive along. In fact, it's almost a little bit too responsive for my liking. It's very immediate. You need to be a bit wary of it on a few of these tight bends. The gearbox is very, very slick. Just a flick of the wrist sends it to where you want it to go. Push the Puma and it really does just keep on going. Make a mistake in it and it's that capable. It can cover up for you. And when you need it, there's a very nice insurance policy. The brakes. You'll be pleased to hear you get instant response. In fact, they're so strong that the Racing Puma has the potential to outbrake a 911 GT3. But while the Racing Puma is every boy racer's dream, caning it around a very smooth track like this, on a road like this, it's a bit of a pain, literally. You see, the suspension is so hard that on dodgy roads you feel every single lump and bump, or rather your back does anyway. Oh yes, it makes you realise what a rather shocking state our roads are actually in. But apart from getting on excellent terms with your local potholes, you can still appreciate how superbly the Puma handles in day-to-day driving. There's plenty of punch from the engine for quick overtaking around town, although as you can imagine, this car may have a tendency to bring out the hooligan in you, so if you're the proud owner of a clean driving licence, then beware. The Racing Puma is a very rare breed of production car because it was born for the track and it feels really at home here. But at £23,000, it's a very expensive choice for an enthusiast. But as Ford are only planning to make 1,000 of these, I don't think they'll have too many problems selling them. And if you still go misty-eyed at the sight of an RS or an XR badge and you rue the day that Ford stopped making the Cosworth, then this will be just the car for you. This coupe is unmistakably big brother to the Puma. But at every turn, it's bolder, it's more exaggerated, it's simply more desirable. And where the car was unmistakably curvy, the Cougar is packed with angles. Its lines are strong, bold, and they're razor sharp. And for versatility, you can't beat the good old hatchback. And what an enormous load area. For once, you don't have to sacrifice space and versatility just to be able to make something of a style statement. Inside is a very different story. All the angles have disappeared, replaced instead by flowing lines, circles and swooping curves. Now, the interior may not be quite as stylish as that of the Puma, but the Cougar is a very different car aimed at a different kind of driver. And there are still plenty of nice touches. Everything is well laid out, just where you want it to be. The driving position seems comfortable. And there's a couple of Cougars' heads around, just to remind you what car you're in. The surprise with the stylish Cougar is that it shares so much with that good old repmobile, the Ford Mondeo. They may well be brothers, but there's no prizes for guessing which one of them got the short straw. One thing you can't deny is that the Cougar's handling is that of a true sporting car. First impressions of the Cougar are that it's the king of the jungle. It's so full of spirit, you just won't want to part with it. The big question, of course, is how much will this supercat set you back? Ford have done it again. With Cougar, they've managed to prove that they really are back on form. Producing cars for those of us who want something a little bit different from life. Those of us who, if faced with the choice, would pick death by chocolate over boring old vanilla any day of the week.
Well, that's it for part one, but right after the break, we'll be looking at the Focus and I'll be driving the big Ford Explorer. We'll see you soon. Howdy y'all. Americans, love them or hate them, they're a breed apart. And when they're over here in the national dress, well, they stick out like a sore thumb. They're loud, brash, and often downright rude. And the cars they drive, well, they're no different. Very ugly and hugely overstated. Well, it might come as a surprise to you that there's been an American car on sale here for the last 4 years. And it's a little less ostentatious than the rest. It's the Ford Explorer, the world's most popular SUV. So whilst this still looks more American and European, it's had much more of the external loudness and mess taken away. Cue for a change, I think. Ha, that's better, nicely toned down, but is this one American that's still wobbly and thirsty away from home? Time to find out. The Empire State Building, the Grand Canyon, Bill Clinton's sex drive and the Ford Explorer. What's the connection? Well, they're all massive. This thing is so big you almost want to fit atmospheric lighting, put a laminate floor in and maybe a patio in the back for when it's hot. And it's actually bigger than the big Shogun and the Grand Cherokee, so there's no danger of not getting noticed out on the road. Now, simple physics tells us that a car this big is going to need a big engine to push it along. Well, this Explorer comes equipped with a massive 4-litre V6. Now that gives out over 200 horsepower and a 0 to 60 time in under 11 seconds, which is pretty impressive for something this big, but for one thing. And that is, you can expect to use the UK's fuel quota on its own in this car, and once you start abusing the power, well, the fuel gauge hits zero faster than you can say, how much? So how does an SUV with this much size and power actually handle? Well, around town, unlike a lot of Americans I'm sure, it's actually quite stable and very firm on the corners. Quite Pamela Anderson-esque actually. And aside from the quite jerky gear change, it's really car-like and quite nice to drive. But once you get out in the open or you're on the motorway, it's a different story. It's pretty noisy and a lot less stable. But let's not forget that this is a 4x4 at heart, so don't be fooled by its more subtle on-road looks. Now, as with most four-wheel drives nowadays, the transmission is switchable from 2 to 4-wheel drive. So it can spend most of its time in 2-wheel drive and you save a little tiny bit on the fuel bills. But when the temperature hits -20 and there's 10 feet of snow outside, or if you're English, you need to mount the curb outside the high school, you can easily knock it into 4-wheel drive with this little switch on the dashboard. Ah yes, that dashboard. Well, just before I put a dampener on things, let's talk about equipment levels, because by any standards this car is superbly well equipped. In fact, it's got enough electrics on it to keep the most permanent Japanese car designer happy. We've got these great big heated leather electric seats. We've got electric mirrors, which of course are big. We've got air conditioning. We've got a fantastic stereo system with a CD changer in the boot. There's ABS, central locking, automatic transmission. I mean, what more could you want? Well, I'll tell you what more I could want. These switches on the dashboard, let's have them in some sort of sensible order, and then not surround them in horrible brown, yes, brown plastic. I mean, what were Ford thinking of? Oh, and one other thing, the gear stick and handbrake lever. I mean, I know there are some big Americans out there, but these seem best designed for a WWF wrestler. Raise the portcullis. Ugh. Now, whilst the huge fuel bills on this car might be a disappointment, the huge amount of luggage space and legroom isn't. And for this, I've got a simple experiment with the lowly tennis ball. Now, bear with me here. This is very clever. This really is quite impressive. It's actually one of the longest vehicles in its class. And here we go. Hey, that's how big it is. Just take a look, it's absolutely huge, like a warehouse. There's bags of room for kids, pushchairs, shopping, or 30,000 McFatburgers with fries if that's what takes your fancy. And this is nice as well, little split tailgate. Very cool. Right then, last but not least, the dollar factor. Now, it's normally true to say that we get quite a raw deal on prices here on American cars. And yes, whilst this car is cheaper in the States than it is to buy here, at £28,000 for this special edition North Face model, it is around £2 cheaper than the equivalent Shogun and Cherokee. And alright, whilst I don't like the dashboard and I think the gear change is a bit harsh, you can't not be impressed by the sheer size of the vehicle and the obvious value for money. So, God bless America!
It's not just in the details that the Focus stands out from the crowd, not just in the strikingly styled headlamp or the rather oddly styled rear windows, or even the triangular side repeater. It's the whole car, and it was undeniably quite a bold move on the part of Ford to introduce something so striking to replace its ubiquitous Escort. And all a very far cry, you might think, from the original Escort when it first arrived on the scene decades ago.
At first, it was good, very good. The Mark I Escort was light, durable, rugged, and with those Coca-Cola bottle good looks, really very attractive. It was also reasonably priced and subsequently very, very popular. Then came the Mark II, a little more boxy, perhaps a little more modern, but probably not as good looking, and it didn't meet with an immediately positive response. Then came Mark III, another change, and gradually through the next marks and generations, the Escort was watered down until the disastrous Mark IV. Probably the only thing that could keep this car selling was the little blue oval on the radiator grille and the confidence that that instilled in the car buyer.
And so they gave us this, the Focus, with its unique form that integrates straight lines and curves, pretty much unlike anything else on the road before it. Now, those looks may be a bit love it or hate it, but whether you do love it or hate it, there is no denying that the Ford Focus is a very good car, for a lot of reasons. For a start, there's the interior where that mix of curves and straight lines has been carried through, and we get this dashboard, which is, well, striking again. To me, it looks rather as though somebody has taken all the required parts, the dials, the vents, the switches, and thrown them violently at the dash, and they've exploded out from behind the steering wheel. Fortunately, though, they've all landed in pretty much the right places, and everything comes to hand as and when you need it. And the plastics used seem to be of pretty decent quality. It doesn't feel like budget, low-rent, cheap car by any means. My only complaint, well, for a modern car in an era when we're supposed to be light and bright, it does feel rather gloomy in here. Personally, I'd rather be in Essex in the rain anyway. I'm in Dunton at Ford's Small and Medium Vehicle Centre, and this is the real birthplace of Focus. This is the mileage accumulation facility, clocking up the kind of miles any rep would be absolutely terrified by. It's all aimed at punishing the catalyser and all the emissions components. And the kind of miles, well, we're talking 50,000 miles in about 4 months. And the really interesting thing is the drivers. They're all robots. And here is our driver. It runs on a 24-hour cycle and it's completely repeatable. That means it can do exactly the same thing time and time again, which is very important if you're going to be analysing and comparing the results one vehicle to another. It doesn't have a name, but I'm going to call it George. Kind of looks like a George. Okay, take it away.
Okay, Richard.
And my mate George has control over the throttle, the gear change and the clutch to simulate real-life driving situations. In fact, he can even simulate really good or really bad drivers.
With the ability to control the temperature between -40 and +90 degrees and to control humidity from 5 to 95%, this room is all about simulating pretty much every climatic condition imaginable. The car is then set up on the jig next to me and set shaking, rattling and rolling to see what happens to the different materials under the different conditions and whether they result in any irritating squeaks and rattles. I know that in my case, I'm starting to rattle. Apparently, you can get these things in yellow as well. And we've got the same degree of climatic control in this room, but in here it's set to a warm and sunny day with a slight breeze, which is very pleasant. But in here things become just a little more focused, if you'll excuse the pun. The table to my left is actually a mast table, a multi-axis shaker table. It can move through all 6 planes and simulate real road scenarios. And on it, the various controls can be operated remotely. So, we can move the glove box and we can move the ashtray. The idea being to assess their sound for quality. Does it sound good under different climatic conditions? That was a good one. I don't like that one. That was quality. I'm not sure about that. This is an 8-channel fixed body test rig. Basically hell on earth for suspension. It simulates every angle of force impacted on the suspension, including the torque of the brakes. And it can inflict 150,000 miles worth of abuse in 5 days. This is not the kind of thing you want to get your tie caught in.
Well, that's it for another car file. Well, on next week's programme, well, there isn't a next week's programme actually, because we've come to the end of the series. Now, I hope you've enjoyed it and it's been of interest to you, but we will be back next year with some great new cars. So thanks for watching and we will see you soon.